In this video, we're going to talk about how to conduct a variance analysis when we're talking about the direct labor account. So if we think back to something like direct materials that we're already familiar with, we say, well, we basically set up the three columns, right? So we have our actual quantity times the actual price, and we have the actual quantity times the standard price, and then we have the standard quantity times the standard price. And now with these three columns, we can do something really nice. We can compare these two columns and get our price variance, and then we can compare these two columns and get our quantity variance, right? But what if we're talking about labor, right? So now labor, we're not just talking about, buying wood or buying raw materials. We're actually talking about people. So how do we translate what we're doing with variance analysis to this situation? Well, actually, it's quite simple. So if we just think about a couple things. So when we think about quantity, when we think about labor, what we're actually just talking about is hours, right? Labor hours, and the number of hours an employee works, right? So that's really our quantity. Instead of pounds of wood or pounds of coal, we're just thinking about the number of hours that someone works. That's really our quantity. And so we can change this AQ here. We can call that AH. Right? We can say that's the actual hours. So we've got AH, and then we'd have standard hours, SH, right? So we just have that translation there, and that's actually really simple. And then when we think about the price, the actual price, the price we pay per pound of coal or so forth. Now that we're talking about labor, we just say, well, price is really a rate, right? And when we talk about rate, we're talking about $13 an hour, $14.50 an hour. That's our rate. Right, so then now we can just kind of change this and say, okay, well, we've got our actual rate, and we just multiply those together, and so now we've got actual hours times actual rate instead of actual quantity times actual price. And all this, it just follows similarly. We can just let me actually, this should be an S. So let's walk through an example. This will be a little bit easier to understand. So again, let's stick with the idea you run a woodworking shop and you manufacture wooden tables. And so now we're going to go and actually conduct variance analysis for your labor. So when we think about the labor, we're going to say, okay, well, we need a standard quantity. And when we talk about standard quantity, we're talking about hours, right? And what we mean here is we need to say, before we make any tables, how many hours of direct labor do we anticipate it's going to take to build the table? And we say, okay, well, we've looked at it, and we really think it should take one of our direct labor employees 3 hours to put together a table. I have no idea if that's fast or slow, but let's just roll with it. So now we also need to know a rate, right? So we say, okay, well, what is our rate? What is the standard that we expect to pay our direct labor employees? Well, we say, let's say it's $12 an hour, right? So we say, okay, $12 an hour, that's our standard rate. Now we can go and look at our actual results for the month, for the period, and start comparing the actuals to the standards, right? That's all we're doing. It's just variance analysis in a different form. So now we say, okay, look, we built 105 tables, and it took us 297 direct labor hours to build those tables, right? Now we paid the direct labor employees, we tally it up and we say, oh, we paid them $4,009.50 during the month. Now, with all this information, we can go ahead and start doing our variance analysis. So we just set it up, same as we did with the direct materials, but again, instead of actual quantity, we're going to have actual hours. Instead of actual price, we're going to have actual rate. Right? So we just substitute those things, and really it's no different than what we did before. So let's start with the leftmost column, and we're going to say that we had the actual amount of hours was 297. All right, 297 hours. And what do we multiply that by? Well, we multiply it by the actual rate. Well, we're not actually given the actual rate. We're going to have to calculate it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the actual amount paid, $4,009.50, and then we're going to divide that by the number of hours that the workers work. That's 297 hours. Okay, so let me write that in there. So we're going to have $4,009.50 divided by 297 hours, and that's going to come down, and then I'll write that in purple. That's going to give us a rate of $13.50 an hour. $13.50 an hour. Now we can just calculate out our total for this left column, and it's going to be, well, we basically already had it. I mean, it's the $4,009.50. I just wanted to be thorough here and make sure you understood how this was similar to the direct material process. But in this case, just the way the given information was set up, we already kind of had the leftmost column. Now let's proceed to the middle column. Okay, so now our actual hours, we know that from before, right? Our leftmost column, that hasn't changed. That's 297 hours. But now we've got this standard rate. So what's the standard rate? Well, we just say, okay, well, what did we decide was the rate that we should be paying our direct labor employees? Well, it was $12 an hour, right? So we just multiply by $12, and I'll just put 12.00. So now we can compute this middle column, and that's going to give us, let's see, what do we have here? $3,564. And now we can compute a variance. But instead of saying it's a price variance, what we're going to call it is the rate variance. Let me make sure we got plenty of space here for you to see this. So I'm just going to draw, let me change to yellow. So I'm going to draw our line just like we did. I just find this instructive to do that. And it's really no different than the direct materials. We say now we've got a rate variance instead of a price variance. All this is saying is we looked at, hey, look, in reality we paid these people $13.50 an hour, but beforehand we thought a good price would be $12 an hour. Now it could be that they ended up working a lot of overtime for some reason. Maybe we didn't have enough employees one day. We had to call in some people to do overtime. I don't know what happened. It's just a red flag, and we're going to say, okay, so we've actually paid more than what we thought, so it's going to be an unfavorable variance, and we just take the difference of these two numbers here, and that's going to give us $445.50 unfavorable variance. Okay, so now we can go with our third column. We can calculate that, and we can go ahead and calculate our next variance, which we can just go ahead and call a quantity variance. It's really no different than what we did with the direct materials again. So when we think about our standard number of hours, our SH here, that we're going to have to calculate. So we've got 105 tables that we made, right? So what was the number of hours it should have taken to do 105 tables? Well, we've got 3 hours right here, right, per table. It's supposed to take 3 hours a table. We made 105 tables, so it should have taken, the standard hours should have been 315. So I'm going to write this. I don't want to belabor the point here, but this is, oh, that's worst looking 3 ever. Okay, so 105 times 3, that's going to be 315 hours. And we're going to multiply that by our standard rate. Well, we've already done that before in the middle column. So that was $12 an hour. Okay. So now this is going to give us a total of $3,780. And now we can go ahead and we can compute our final variance here. So and I'll just call this the quantity variance. And when we talk about the quantity variance, we look and we say, okay, well, nothing has changed about the rate. In each case, the rate was held constant at the standard rate of $12 an hour. Well, what has changed? Well, the number of hours that it took to make these tables. And in reality, it took us 297 hours when we had said we thought it would take 315. So actually, we're going to have a positive or a favorable variance here, right? And that's going to be just the difference of these two numbers. I believe that is $216. $216. And I'm going to put a little F next to that to indicate that's a favorable variance. Now, don't fall in love too much with kind of this categorization of favorable or unfavorable. I mean, it's helpful, but in this case, let's think about this intuitively. So we thought to make a nice table, our employees should spend 3 hours. but they spent less than that per table. Now, it could be that, hey, we underestimated how quickly our employees can work on these tables. They're really, really smart. They're really fast. It only takes them, 297 hours to do what a normal employee would take 315 hours. Or, alternatively, it could be that they didn't take the due care that we want them to in making those tables. Maybe they're poor quality tables because they were rushing to get them done. We don't know, right? We're not quite sure, but we just say, okay, well, we've got a flag here. It's favorable, but we might want to say, hey, why is it that we didn't spend as much time on making the tables as we thought? So now we can go ahead and we can compute a total variance. So I'll just write that down here. That's our total variance. And our total variance is going to be $229.50 unfavorable, right? And that doesn't look like a U. Okay, well, let me go back to blue for our variance indicator. So it's unfavorable. And why is that? Well, we've got $445.50 unfavorable rate variance, but then that's reduced by this $216 favorable quantity variance, right? We're basically just netting them together. That's all we're doing, is to treat this like a negative number here, this 445.50, and then the 216 as like a positive number, and then you net them together, and you end up with this net $229.50 unfavorable total variance.